Welcome back to the 12 Days of DFIRmas, where we spotlight the people shaping the future of digital forensics and incident response. Today's guest is Sam Brothers, Director of Digital Forensics at Hive International and a true pioneer in mobile and enterprise forensics. Sam has spent decades building and leading DFIR programs across government and industry, contributing to national standards and tackling some of the most complex investigations out there. Today we're diving into AI and DFIR, what's real, what's the hype, and how it's changing the way examiners work. Thank you so much for joining the 12 Days of DFIRmas. I have Sam Brothers with me. And for our audience, can you kind of tell us a little bit about your background and how you got into digital forensics?
Sure, you bet. Initially in about 2004, there was a phone that I had and it didn't take video. So I hacked it and put a new OS on it, new upgraded OS, which got me into that phone. And at the time I was working for customs, and someone said, does anybody have any good ideas of what to look for at our borders? And I thought, if I can, copy files onto my Motorola V3 phone, I think the bad guys are probably smarter than me. So that kicked off a career at customs and built their digital forensics program. That's how I got started.
So you primarily specialize in mobile forensics, is that right?
Initially, yeah, I started out in phones, and initially when that had first started in 2004, it was a very small amounts of data, and I moved over into a little bit of computer forensics over time as well, and have been teaching for IACIS, teaching their computer forensics program, and then I developed their mobile forensics certification as well.
Well, your background behind you says you're really passionate about mobile forensics. I love that.
Yes, I am. I definitely am. I love my phones, and that's definitely the focus, and it has been. When I first started in forensics, it was like 5% phones and 95% PC, and I thought back then, I'm like, this is going to be big. It's so big. I think the classes for a lot of these organizations are going to flip from being computer forensic focused to be mobile device focused, and that's really what happened. Is a lot of our cases have moved in that direction, that we look at the mobile device first. We look at the data associated with those mobile devices, and then we'll move on to the PC.
So you and I actually met at the Oxygen Forensic Conference in Orlando.
Yeah.
And you came to my talk, which I greatly appreciate you attending. But it kind of got a little heated when we were talking about AI, because I think there's a lot of misconceptions about AI in our industry and what that's looking like. So we talked during our presentations about different workflows and stuff that you can use during triage. So I definitely, and that's how we got connected. I was like, I want you on my podcast. I want you to talk about this. So how do you think it's
Sure.
currently impacting our workflows now?
Well, AI is the new hotness right now, right? So it doesn't matter what it is, as long as it's got AI in it, it's got to be good, right? It's what we're hearing from a lot of the management level staff is, they really want that in there. And it's a tool, and it can be used, in my opinion, certainly, but there are some caveats that go with that. It's using it judiciously, using it with some kind of parameters for holding onto your data and minding where that is, knowing how far down the rabbit hole your data engine can go, or your LLMs can go. And then lastly, and most importantly, do you understand what it is that's coming back? If I get that information and it says, here's your piece of data in this database, and you don't understand that that's actually in a free page and not in the live database, it's really not worth a whole bunch. So I think, how has it changed? And the answer really is it's changing a lot of how people are approaching the problem of too much data, the big data problem, right? So when our phones first came out, I had 16 kilobytes, 300 kilobytes worth of data in that device of storage, a couple hundred text messages, maybe 100 different, contacts. And Now it's thousands of contacts and it's 30,000 images in a phone. That's what I've got on my device. And 2 terabytes, is not unheard of. And how does an examiner go through 30,000 images, looking for the thing? It's like, I want to find the boat. Well, before, when I was talking about a couple hundred images in a device, that's a doable thing. I can sit down and accomplish that as, easily. But with 30,000 images, you've got to have something that's got to be able to, be that pattern interrupt to go ahead and speed along that process. And it's not really about solely relying on that tool to do everything. And I think that's where a lot of people get tripped up is it doesn't do math well, as an example. So when I retook the CFCE class again after teaching it for 10 years, and it occurred to me as taking the class, I'm like, wow, what if I throw it a couple of images of drives? I gave it Brian Carrier's book, brand new LLM. I gave it Brian Carrier's book on file system forensics. And then I gave it the first 1024 bytes of a drive image, just showed it the hex. It couldn't do the basic math on doing the calculations of where the partitions were, even though it was there in plain English on the page. And what was even more worrisome was the math was badly wrong. Hex math was badly wrong. And adding, 10 to something like C8 came up to like F4. And, that the math doesn't math. So after arguing with it for a few hours, I finally realized, not finally, but I proved it to myself that, at least where we're at now, these things might be good at language problems, hence the name large language model. But it's just not doing the math well. And I think if you simply take the approach of just put the AI sticker on the problem, of too much data, then magically, your backlog's going to disappear. And that's not how it works.
Yeah.
So
where do we find the balance between like speed and accuracy?
Good question. I think where that good nexus and where that balance is AI helps us, can help us to go deep, can help us to look at large data sets very quickly and at least point us in the right direction. But where we need to slow down and that speed is valuable, but what's really important is accuracy. And, I don't have to prove it to you. There's millions of examples of, why, hey, I'll ask it to go find the thing and it finds a thing. And then I go to prove the thing, whatever it is that it found. And it's not there. There's a lot of false positives. So speed's important, but accuracy is what we're going to use to keep us honest in this business. And integrity is, kind of everything.
What kind of cases are you currently working now?
So, I'm working in terms of using AI for this acceleration or making things faster using AI. I've actually just recently used it for, so I had an organization that had a new laboratory system put in place. And there's probably 6 years worth of great lab data. And what we had was the organization had, like, every time there was a murder, they were capturing, here's the 5 places where I found that data, or here's the 2 places where that data lived. And that was great for the men and women that worked the murder cases, but the people who worked, CSAM, they probably didn't know where to look. So what I did was I was using a custom LLM to take a look across the entire data set and leverage, thousands of cases and, 50, 100 different examiners and be able to coalesce that and provide a force multiplier so that then you have a new examiner, the baby examiner, that walks in and says, hey, I have this murder case. This AI tool can help point them in the direction of, hey, here's 4 places that it might be. And based on what I see, 3 of them actually exist. Here's where you should be looking, type of thing. So kind of that guidance, not, and here's the answer, they're guilty or innocent type of thing. So, that's one example of where I've seen it used, that I've personally used it. I haven't seen it used yet with the full, and I cringe when I say this, but the Nintendo forensics folks that, push a button and expect the answer.
Mm-hmm.
I think we see that sometimes when people are in a rush with a really bad backlog, and you see, hey, I'll give you the report. That's great, but you need to understand the caveats that go along with that, right? There's 6 million different apps. I teach a class on SQLite forensics. I've been teaching it for 10 years. It still, gets sold out every time because there's 6 million apps, and even the best forensic tool that we've got that are tens or $20,000, they only support directly parsing, 1/10 of 1% of that, and that's a really small number.
Yeah.
When we've got to get it right, So somebody's going to go home with their family tonight, or are they going to go sit in a 6x6 for the next 40 years? That's an important decision that I take seriously. I know a lot of examiners do as well.
Yeah, that's a very interesting perspective to state it that way, of how many apps are actually parsed and covered by some of the tool sets that are out there. Because I think when you are talking about these big box companies like digital forensic companies that Cellbrite and Magnet Forensics, they are expected to parse out a lot of different data sets, a lot of different apps that are sitting out there, but there's a wealth of other apps that aren't even touched, because not because they don't want to support them, but just the sheer volume of getting to them and then keeping up with it.
Yeah, how do they know which of the 6 million are important to you in your case? And you're right, that's a big challenge that we have. And I think that's where the examiner's experience comes into play. Is, hey, I know this is a human smuggling case, so here's the 6 apps more than likely that data is going to be in. Again, I think AI plays a role, at least in the triaging of those kinds of things, to say, hey, Sam found, he works a lot of these cases, this is where that data is found. You can leverage that same information so at least where to get started.
Yeah, and then also validating outputs, right? I've actually heard a couple different use cases with AI. I've heard individuals say that they've used it as a secondary review, which I don't know,
interesting.
How to feel about that. It depends on the tool set. We would always tell people for our tool set, you can use it to process the case for secondary review, but then you're still having to go through and do an examination, right? But it's not a push button and you're done for the day. But it does speed up along the process of processing that data and triaging the same stuff that you would do with a traditional tool set. So I guess, what do you think the biggest risks are in our community right now, especially with false positives or
and it's interesting you say that that's used as the second. I would actually advocate, if you're going to do anything, I would put that beginning in your process rather than later in your process.
Yeah.
I would advocate for that. And what the risk there is, we see lots and lots of false positives with a lot of these things. And I've been working with the Scientific Working Group for Digital Evidence on completing and we should have this done by January, out for public review, is the position on the use of AI in DF and DFIR. And, it boils down to, sure, you can use it, but number one, you've got to contain your data. Number two, you've got to be able to repeat and understand those results, not just say, I ChatGPT did it or Grok did it.
Yeah.
That's not acceptable.
Explainability for sure. Yeah.
Right? Yeah. And then lastly, somebody, a human being, has to sign that report and say, yea, verily, I can testify this is my report, not just I got the report ipso facto, there's the answer type of thing. That's not forensics. That's clicking a button, getting a report, and putting it on a desk. And the risks there, I think, are very big. And there's this, we were talking before about this balance between, you can't possibly look at every single element of every single case. Not possible.
Right.
So we've got to use those tools to speed up and go through the data. And when we've got terabytes to go through and petabytes and yottabytes worth of data. So how do you do that? And, I don't advocate on the far end of, well, let's automate everything, right? Just because we can. That's very dangerous. And then you can go to the opposite end of the spectrum and say, well, let's do a deep dive on every single case. Well, our year of backlogs will be 10, 15, 20-year
Right.
backlogs, right? So I think somewhere in that middle ground is a good spot to be. And there's risk. There's going to be, I think, the more you hedge towards using more of the artificial intelligence and not human checking, I think you're exposing yourself to a lot more risk.
Yeah. So you're looking at students as well as examiners coming to you. Do you see any skill sets like diminishing with digital forensics since AI has been introduced?
Oh, absolutely. I think, it brings up, the floor on productivity, but it also I think it'll raise the bar for professionalism. I think where you're going to see those biggest changes are in the triaging of the information. And we've already got tools that do that today. They may not have the AI stamp on it, or the label that says this is AI, but certainly we have tools, that are running through a drive, and I'll say, this is a embezzlement case. So pull me all the Excel files and all the PDFs, and maybe I'm not that interested in pictures type of thing. We've had those tools for a while, and I think this is that next evolution for my opinion, in the triage phase, is a really good application. And I think we'll have less people doing that job and more people doing what takes more brain power and more critical thinking skills, which is that next step of taking a look at the results from that triage and then making the next step, going after that data and validating what's there. It's easy sometimes for me to say, sure, it's in this database, and I get that all the time, but where is really important? If it's in a wall file, okay, it's in a wall file, but is it the last transaction, meaning it's live, or is it way up higher somewhere in that journal file that means this was, history stuff, past stuff? So again, to summarize, I think we're really we'll continue to see more of that change, where we'll move these types of tools will be used a lot more in that triage phase.
Yeah, and are you leveraging best practices by like NIST? I mean, I know you mentioned the working group that you're involved in, but NIST for AI tool outputs and stuff like that, or are you following any groups?
Yeah, so like I was mentioning about scientific working group for digital evidence, SWIG-DE, absolutely. And I think a lot of people are paying close attention to what a lot of those organizations are saying and have been saying for quite some time, because you have organizations like SWIG-DE. Remember when it was like 10 or 15 people, and now there is 100 people that are getting together for these meetings to put together best practice documents. And it makes my heart happy to see so many people so passionate about, our, our area of work and have so many different opinions from the educational perspective, as well, and bringing in lawyers so we have a good purchase on the legal aspects, of what, these repercussions of a lot of these decisions are. So, I don't think, I think some of those organizations right now are starting to come out with more, and I'm looking forward to organizations like NIST putting out even more. They've got some out there already, and it's not going away.
Yeah.
Clearly, it's not going to disappear. I don't think it's a bubble. I think it's something we're going to use, and how it gets used going forward, I think will also change. We were at a point where you could really only use an LLM with a really, really strong machine. And who could afford the big iron like that? That was really expensive. And not everybody had a $40,000 PC, or server to run this on. And, now these engines, the LLMs have gotten much more organized, or much more optimized, so that we can run this on smaller hardware. And now we've gotten to the point where we can actually run it local. And that helps us, I think, in law enforcement, because we're no longer having that restriction of, I can't use that LLM because all that data is out there somewhere on the internet, in the cloud, wherever. But now it can actually be housed internally, and I can leverage the organization's mental capacity and the things that the organization is doing internally, and then to share that as I see fit,
Yeah. Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see, especially how NIST has a ton of guidance and documentation around AI, more so as to how to build the models or train the models and different data sets and stuff like that. It will be interesting to see that evolve into more strictly computer forensics, digital forensics, because they do have a computer forensic testing, right? They have the CTFF that's associated with NIST, for accreditation purposes. So it will be interesting to see how that evolves.
And now that you mention that too, I don't see a lot of folks looking at the bias issue with these
No.
LLMs, right? And initially, I think somebody, when I first brought this up, I was thinking, well, maybe it's not biased. And, at the root of this, somebody has to have written this, whatever the thing is, right? So they bring their own bias, whether they like it or not, because we're human. And we created that tool. So that tool then has some kind of bias towards it. So as more people put into that tool, their bias also affects that. So if you want to believe from a psychological perspective that everybody has completely different and ultimately balanced bias, which I do not believe, because we do not live in a perfectly harmonious world. We just don't.
Yeah.
So that would lead me to believe that these tools are just as unbalanced from a bias perspective as we are. And I also think we, even in the digital forensics community, I think a lot of us take, what's said as gospel, and that's scary, because the tool speaks with authority, and even if it's right 70% of the time, a lot of people are like, well, it was right the other 5 times I checked, so I'm not going to check anymore. And it's, well, little do you realize, the other 4 answers you just got were all completely wrong, and 2 of them were just made up, because we get lazy, and I think that happens too. And I think this, again, I go back to what I was saying before, is I think a lot of good examiners, this will be a force multiplier. I think if you're a lazy examiner, I think this will really put a spotlight on that. It may look great in the beginning, but the minute you start really focusing in down and taking a look at those results, you're going to find very quickly that it's not nearly as reliable as you would like it to be.
Do you think more junior examiners should have like a check, like you have to have these criterias before you use like an AI assisted tool. Or you
Oh,
need to
that's
be able to explain to me all of these different concepts and show me exactly where they come from, like artifact wise or wherever this database sits, before you
I
can
see,
use an AI assisted tool.
and I see your point, and yeah, I think that has a place. Um, and I think what you're talking about really gets to the root of the challenge, which is, do you understand these results?
Yeah,
I'm okay that a thing led you there, right? I'm okay that you know that you need to look in the database, but again, if you don't understand what that really means, other than you just have the answer and you're like, I don't know, it's in the database. Thank you for playing.
yeah,
Um, and that's a problem. I think as we go on, I think the more junior examiners are going to rely more on that, especially in the beginning. To be quite honest with you, would I like to see them weaned off of that and to start with, and that's how IACIS and many other organizations, actually SANS, designs their training, is they start you out with no tools and we're going to do everything at the command line, and it's going to be painful, and we're going to do it in hex, and you're going to understand how the OS works and how it interacts with these files and how the human aspect interacts with the machine and what the residue is of those interactions. Because then once you understand all of those things, the tools just become ubiquitous. You can
right.
change out the tool, but I can't fix if you don't know how the thing, how it got there, or that piece of information, plays into your case. That's one thing. But if you don't understand what it is and how it got there and why it's there, the rest is kind of useless. And somebody's going to tear you apart in court, as well they should.
Absolutely. And that would be terrifying. I just feel like there's an art to digital forensics that it's not lost yet, but I feel like
Mm-hmm.
it's being diminished. Because a lot of individuals don't understand the hex, or they don't understand how to find things just using command line or digging through any database without relying on a tool set to process it for them.
So maybe it's changing. Maybe it's not being. I'm not saying it's not diminishing, but I would say it's definitely changing, and it's not. I think a lot of people make the mistake of, and to your point, I think a lot of people make the mistake of, you know, because I'm using AI and I got this magic answer 10 times faster than you did, I must be smarter. And it's not a matter of being the most smart person in the room. That's not what I'm trying to say. But I think there's a lot of misplaced confidence in these results. And if, if you, yeah, there are a lot of things that I can't quantify. If I'm doing a case, it's like, hmm, I, I was doing an exam on some guy's PC, and I saw something in the recent run that just got my attention. I can't tell you why it brought me there, but kind of based on the totality of the circumstances, I'm like, let's go take a look at this. That ended up being, one of the great pieces of evidence in our case. I'm not sure that an LLM would have figured that out. Not that it couldn't, but it's that art piece, that second, that sixth sense, that sometimes you have just from experience because you saw it 20,
Right.
28 cases ago. But I could also argue the other way, that if we put all of that information in an LLM, right, then it could make that, and should be making that inference from 28 cases ago if it saw it once. But we're also shaped by things that don't happen in the workplace too.
Yeah.
I get shaped by the podcasts I watch or listen to, and the things that I read, and the organizations I interact with, and the cases that I've done, completed, and been challenged with. And, all of that makes me who I am and brings my unique experience to the table. And that's the art, that you're talking about, that I agree could not, it's really hard to replicate that. It's like, I could give you, or me, I could take the same paints, brushes, and canvas, that Picasso had, maybe not some of the more modern ones, but, some of the great works of art like Van Gogh and things like that. It's like I can have the same tools, but I'm not going to get the same results, even if I try really, really, really hard. Even if a computer is telling me now move a little bit to the right, a little bit more to the right, it's just, it doesn't work that way. There's that personal touch to it too.
Yeah. So in summary, are you for or against AI?
um, I am for AI, but there needs to be guardrails around it. Um, like I've been saying, number one, you've got to be able to contain and know where your data is, know that provenance. You've got to keep control of it and know where it's at. Number two, you have to do a human being review. And then lastly, a examiner, she has to be responsible, not it, but she, a human being of some kind has to be ultimately responsible. I think where I would say no is when we get into that scary spot of people just saying, we'll just use AI and not understanding what the tool does, just do the thing. And that I think, and not understanding that the results aren't perfect and they're not even close to perfect, despite it speaking with authority,
Yeah.
on and providing volumes of information. That's great, but your entire premise was wrong, or there really were only two potato chips, not 15, so completely, the rest of the information about dieting is completely off, that type of thing. So am I for or against? I'm for it with those caveats. And I think it's incumbent upon us as good examiners with integrity to educate, who it is that we're working with and for, to do the right thing and give them that education and, help them to understand, this is how this new technology is affecting us.
Yeah. And also stay curious, right? Of like the different changes that are coming out. Don't just stay in one lane.
Yeah, and that's hard. And that's actually one of the reasons I got involved in forensics to begin with, is because it was so big and there were so many wonderful things to learn. And, it's no longer, you can't just focus on mobile forensics specifically. It's, there's parts of it now that have their own, expertise. It used to be, hey, I know all the phones. Well, okay, that was when there were like 100 different phones, and now we've got, thousands of different phones and lots of derivative operating systems versions. Like with Android, you have all the branches of each operating system that comes out. So you can become expert in just that alone. So I think it's going to be incumbent upon us long term. I could not agree more.
Yeah. So this is a seasonal podcast, and I do have to ask, what is something you're looking forward to this holiday season?
Well, I'm headed out to a ski resort out in Maryland, and hoping for lots and lots of snow and lots of quiet, and a fireplace.
Oh
So
my
how about
gosh.
you?
Is the snow in the forecast or no? How's it looking?
Yes,
It
there
is?
is. There. Yeah, we're bringing the Jeep 4-wheel drive, so we're hoping.
Fingers
We're hoping.
crossed. Do you ski?
Yeah, I do. Yeah, I ski, I snowboard, and it's something I've loved since I've been a kid.
Oh my
How
gosh.
about you?
I do not ski. I am the Instagram reel you see of the person flying down, just a total disaster.
No.
Yeah, it's like there's no coordination skills here at all. And if I wanted to stand on a snowboard, it would probably be torture at this point because I'd just fall immediately. So,
Aw.
yeah, I'm a snow tube. I go to a ski resort and we go snow tubing, and that's my
Oh,
level
cool.
of skill. Like flopping down and laying on a tube and going down the hill.
Yeah.
So,
That takes, it's quite scary, I think, as you get to speed when your face is like right there.
oh my gosh. I would
Um,
swear, the ski resort we go to, I think they ice it down. They make it go faster somehow. I'm like, this just seems dangerous. It's almost like the scene from, Christmas Vacation when they put the grease on the bottom. I'm like,
hey, Amy, it's good to see you. Got to go. Bye.
yeah. So they put hay bales at the bottom to stop you, but I don't know.
Have you hit the hay bales?
Yes, every single time. Yeah,
Well
and I
done.
put a lot of faith in those bales to stop me. So, but no, I'm a country girl at heart. So I grew up on a dairy farm. So I know how much those, hay bales weigh. And I'm like,
Okay.
try to do the calculation. Maybe I should add Chat GPT to do the calculation. How many hay bales does it take to stop
Probably,
me?
yes. Do the physics calculation for me.
Yeah, it'd probably be like 2 hay bales. It would say it with confidence too.
Exactly. Might
So,
even say like 2 pieces of straw. Yes. And here's the math behind it, which is completely wrong. But
yeah. Well, that sounds really nice. I like it. So,
thanks.
well, thank you so much for being on the podcast. I appreciate it.
And,
I love hearing your
well,
perspectives on AI. So, thank you.
thanks. And I appreciate the time and appreciate the opportunity. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Happy holidays.
Happy holidays.